if you can, try to use like Chrome or Edge, because the browser does make a difference when you're dealing with a very complicated web-based application as Equidox is. Now,
okay, perfect.
What I'll do first is I'll go to the import document screen, and I think you figured out how to import things because you've gotten the document in there. You can click to open up your folders, or if your folders are already open, you can just do like a drag and drop as well. So let's see here. Let's just take like this one. And if you just do like a drag and drop, that document will upload to the cloud very quickly. And you can upload multiple documents at a time. It doesn't have to be just one by one. I think we put like we kind of put a limit to like 10 at a time per remediator. So that way someone doesn't take their entire hard drive and upload it all at once. So if we then press the import button, Equidox will initially look at this document to figure out, like, does it have any existing tags? If it does have tags, it will kind of like convert that tag structure into our reading zone system. The reading zone system is a little bit different than the tags, but really it will create the tag structure when we export the document. So during that import, it's kind of just seeing what this document's all about. If there's no tags at all, which is the case with this document, this original document here, if we look at it in Acrobat, it's completely untagged. So during that import, Equidox will run its auto detection, and it will find that there's like images and text, of course, and if there's any hyperlinks or fillable form fields, different elements that can be detected on the import process. Equidox will kind of help get you started by creating those reading zones for you, which we'll get into here in just a second. This is the document that I just imported. So it's right here available at like the top of your recent documents list. The 5 most recent documents that have been interacted with will always be available up here. But then as you import more and more documents, the rest will start to kind of pile in down below. And there are some pretty basic like searching and filtering features here, which we don't really need to go into. It's pretty self-explanatory. But if you need to go back and find stuff that you were working on months ago, you can always, kind of use these to your advantage to help you find it quicker. But most of the time I find that people are working on like a handful of documents all at once. They're not necessarily working on 50 documents at a time. So usually it's, a couple documents here, a couple documents there. You finish it up, and you export it and move on with other things. So I'll click on this document, and it will bring me into the document detail page. In the document detail page, you have the 2 thumbnails for the 2 pages. You also have like a searching feature. Now, this is not really relevant for a 2-page document, but if you have 200 pages, maybe you want to go to page 186, you can just type that in and go there. You don't have to scroll through hundreds. Let's see, it looks like we have someone else coming in. Okay. Hello. Hello to, I'm sorry, it just says your name is LSCC website. So welcome. I hope that
David.
Oh, hi, David. Are you able to see my screen and the mouse moving?
Yeah, sorry, I'm late.
Okay, great. So we're just getting started here. All we've really done so far is import a document. So the 2 pages here, you can click on either thumbnail and go directly to that page. You have buttons up here to export back to a PDF, which we're not really ready to do quite yet. But if we did, at least this document would come out with some tags. Like the tags wouldn't be perfect, but just by importing the document, it's effectively like auto tagging it in some regard. But we're not going to press export yet because we know that we have to go in and kind of clean the tag tree up a bit. Now, we can also share the document. So this is an important part of Equidox because it is web-based. Of course, you can share PDFs with other users, and you can actually have multiple people working on the same document even at the same time. So if you had a 200-page document and it had like a tight deadline that you're really kind of stressing about, maybe your 4 best remediators, you share the document with them, and then all 4 of them each take a 50-page section of that 200-page document. And that way you can get that document finished in a fraction of the time and meet that deadline, because 200 pages is kind of, a daunting task for any one person on their own. You can delete the documents if you want. You don't have to delete anything. Equidox has no like data restrictions or maximum number of pages or files or anything like that. You can have as many documents as you'd like in your Equidox account. But if you want to clear clutter up and, like get rid of stuff that's 6 months old or whatever, you can delete things at any time. Down below, you have the properties of the document. The properties you can adjust. So the first one, and probably the most important one, is the document title. Take note that the file name, which is showing right here, and this is actually a link to download the original. So if you ever like misplaced like the original copy of a document, you can always download it straight from Equidox. But this title here, it happens to be identical to the file name. So what Equidox does is if your document doesn't have a title, which is an extremely common thing that I find probably 75% of the documents don't have titles, Equidox will take the file name and fill it into the title field for you. And this is really just an effort to not leave it blank, because if it's blank, it's of course going to fail every accessibility check in the world. It's really like one of the very first criteria that gets checked to make sure that the document has a title. But this here, if you look at the file name, everyone can have their own kind of crazy file naming convention using abbreviations and acronyms and random sequences of numbers. This might make perfect sense to the person that owns the document and wants to just keep their hard drive organized. But to the average person, this is just going to be a bunch of gibberish, especially coming through a screen reader. A screen reader is going to read that for what it is. So you want to make sure that you always like clean up and kind of polish your titles. Make sure that you're putting spaces between the words, making sure that you're just getting rid of like extra fluff that really doesn't have anything to do with the topic of the document. And this is also great search terms to add to the PDF. So this document will be much easier to find in the future. If your website has tens of thousands of PDFs, you might be doing a quick search and you'll be able to find this a lot easier, because you're probably not going to remember to type in that exact sequence of characters if you're looking for something. You can also add an author. So adding an author is optional. This is not related to like accessibility compliance. But again, from a search term perspective, it's good metadata to apply to the document. Just makes things easier to find in the future. It can kind of, just boost up your website a little bit, even with like Google searching. The other thing is the language attribute. Now we will set the language attribute to English by default, with the assumption being that probably 90–95% of the documents that you work on are written in English. But you can, of course, have exceptions to that. So if you have like foreign language classes or, info packets for exchange students, you might have different documents in different languages. So you can choose the language from this drop-down menu, and this will indicate to the screen reader like what language the document is in. So if you had a Japanese document, you obviously can't have an English screen reader trying to read Japanese. It would have no idea what to do with the characters. So like I said, most of the time, this is just already set for you, so you probably don't have to worry about it. But we will. But if you need to change it, you certainly can through that drop-down menu. I'll save the properties because I changed my title. So that's, make sure you can save it, so that applies. And now I'll click on the thumbnail for page 1. And when I click on this thumbnail, it's going to take me into the remediation page. Now in the remediation page, the first thing that you probably notice are the yellow rectangles here. So these yellow rectangles are what we call reading zones. And reading zones are what we were able to create during that import process. So we started with a completely untagged document, but Equidox, when we imported it, realized, okay, this document's never been tagged before. So let's try to detect like kind of what's going on here. And it's able to find that there's all of this encoded text on this page, and it puts these zones in more or less the correct spot for us, so that we don't have to come in and like the first thing we don't have to do is like start like resizing and moving stuff around. We don't have to add a bunch of new zones. We already have like a pretty good collection of zones on the page that we can work with. Now, if you don't like the way that your zones are kind of set up initially for whatever reason, up here you have this little slider. This sensitivity slider, if you move it around back and forth, like left and right, you'll see how Equidox kind of changes the granularity of those reading zones. Now, I don't really need to use the slider on this page. I had a perfectly fine starting point just upon arrival. But if you don't like your starting point for whatever reason, you can just nudge this around and see if it will give you like, a better place to work from. Really with the slider, it's not going to like magically create perfect tags. It's not going to figure out like how to tag a crazy complex table or a nested list that merges across pages. It's not going to do that automatically, but the slider is just trying to give you like the most optimal starting point. So you're looking for like that path of least resistance to go from just kind of these basic text zones on the page to a tag structure that is going to make sense for this page. So really, I just look for the proper granularity so that I have like the correct number of zones on the page, knowing that I'm going to have to just do kind of minimal polishing work from that point forward. Now, another important feature of Equidox that you might remember from way back when we did the demo a few months ago, this button here that looks kind of like a computer monitor. This button, when you press it, will open up a separate tab in your browser. And in this preview, you get the HTML rendering of the page that you're working on. So this HTML is basically just showing you like, what will a screen reader user experience if we were to just export this document in its current form. So everything on the page right now is just text. You know, there was no tags to start with, so everything got detected as text. So right now, this is not much to look at in the preview because it's all just kind of very monotone. But this is the order in which all of that content would be read based on the positioning of these zones. Now, just going back to the slider for a second, you know, when you're working in Equidox, like, and you just kind of are playing around trying to figure it out, like, if you slide this way over to the right, everything kind of zooms out. And then if you were to look at your preview, you'll see very obviously, like, that's not really where you want to start from. Like, you don't want to have to like break apart all of these paragraphs now. That's just like kind of a silly point to start from, because you'd have to end up resizing a bunch of things and moving stuff around. Now, again, if you go way over to the left at the same time, you don't want to start from there, because you just, you know, now you have a bunch of like fragmented sentences that, again, you can clean this up, but why start from this point and have to like resize things when you can just nudge the slider and give yourself, you know, a much more logical place to work from. So the slider, I always recommend, just from like an order of operations perspective, like move the slider around kind of as your first step, and then start making your more precise changes. Because if I start making a bunch of adjustments to these zones one by one, and then go back to the slider, it's gonna like reset a lot of the work that I just did. So use the slider kind of like as that first like approach to the page, making sure that you're starting with the right number of zones. And then once you've established your slider, the first thing that I typically work on on a PDF page is I try to figure out the heading structure. Now, some pages are just kind of like, you know, like a textbook or a novel or an article. Sometimes there's no headings on a page. Sometimes it's just a bunch of paragraphs, or it's a bunch of paragraphs in a list, or a bunch of paragraphs in a table, or whatever. Not every page has headings, but for this page here, I always try to like take a first glance and see like, all right, what is like kind of the basic heading structure that I need to set up on this page? So the heading structure on this page is pretty straightforward, but there, of course, are some rules for heading structure that we always need to adhere to. And by the way, this menu over here on the right is collapsible if you want to get it out of the way. So the first heading always must be a heading level 1. There's really no exceptions to that rule. Every PDF must start with a heading level 1 as the first heading in the document, no matter what. So this element here seems like a perfectly logical heading level 1 to me, because of the fact that it's like big, bold text up at the top of the first page, and it kind of defines the main topic of the PDF. Now, it is a text zone by default because, again, we started with an untagged PDF. So just by importing it, you know, Equidox doesn't automatically assign heading structure just because like font is bold. Like that can lead you down a really dark and gloomy path, because sometimes font is bold just for the sake of being bold. So we can't just rely on like, oh, this font is centered, so it must be a heading, or it's big, so it must be a heading. That's not a good way of going about things. It's really up to a human to interpret what is this content, and is it a heading? And if so, we can adjust it to be a heading. So this element is, again, a text zone by default, and you can hit this drop-down menu and you can scroll down and you can find heading and you can change it that way. But I find that to be very, very slow. So when I want to set a heading level 1, all I have to do is tap 1 on my keyboard. And when you tap 1 on your keyboard, it will automatically become a heading level 1. And if you were to go back to your preview, you will find that you get this increased font to give you that visual confirmation that that element has been set as an H1. The next kind of important rule of heading structure is that in the PDF world, you really only set a single heading level 1 for the entire document. And then from there, like all of the major sections of the PDF are going to be defined as heading level 2s. So once I've got my heading level 1 established, the next heading on the page must be a heading level 2. I don't keep repeating heading level 1. I don't jump from heading level 1 to heading level 4 just because I feel like it. I have to follow that logical nesting. So I'm dropping down a level to this heading here, and this is going to be a heading level 2. And all I have to do is tap 2 on my keyboard, and then that will change itself to a heading level 2. And again, if you want to look at your preview, you don't have to check your preview every time you make a little adjustment, but you can kind of see things are starting to shape up over here. The next 3 headings are all going to be of the same level. So I kind of like interpret this as we have this major section here kind of talking about what is lorem ipsum. And then this is like a little bit more like granular breaking down of information kind of falling underneath this main section like divider here. So these are all heading level 3s. And I'm kind of going off of that. You can use like font style to help you with this. When I'm training people, I always like, 9 times out of 10, you can kind of like rely on the author of the document to have followed some sort of like consistent formatting throughout their document, because most people kind of take pride in making documents look neat and tidy and kind of clean. So 9 times out of 10, you can see like, okay, the font style is the same. They were kind of intending for these 3 little subsections here to all be like of the same ranking within that hierarchy. So they are all going to be H3s, and you can just tap 3 on your keyboard. Now that will work fine for this document here, and it will work fine for most documents, but still you have to be a little bit wary of complete reliance on font style. Sometimes you'll find documents that are they're like Frankenstein PDFs, where it's a bunch of PDFs that were combined as one. And so you have all these different like source PDFs, and when you string them all together, now they're one giant PDF. And even though the fonts might be different, you still have to like adhere to a logical heading structure that makes sense for now the entire PDF, rather than having 5 separate PDFs that on their own have their own kind of individual font style and heading structure. So still just be like aware of like, not all PDFs are created the same. Most of them will have some sort of logic to the fonts that are being used, but things can definitely go astray on certain documents. But all of those heading level 3s have now been defined. And when I go over to my PD or my HTML preview, I can see all those headings have now like that larger font. And the reason why I like to set my heading structure kind of early on the page is because it makes it really obvious now that I have like a reading order issue. So I never want to see back-to-back headings of the same level like this. You can have
I'm on your call.
I'm sorry?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. We're headed out.
Okay. So you can have a heading level 1 directly followed by a heading level 2. That's perfectly logical, perfectly fine. It's dropping down a level. But you don't want to have a heading level 3 directly followed by another heading level 3. There must be some sort of content in there if you're going to do that, because you need to have like a paragraph or a list or an image or a table or something. Otherwise, why would a heading level 3 be a heading of another heading level 3? So this is just a simple reading order issue. Right now, Equidox is assuming that the reading order for the page is 1 column. And that really just means left to right, top to bottom. And the little green flag up here, like that shows reading zone number 1. That shows reading zone 2. That shows reading zone 3, 4, 5, 6, so on. And then you get down here and it goes 7, 8, 9, and 10. Because again, it's just assuming that this is like left to right, top to bottom. So it continues to scan across the page. It finds 7 and then it finds 8. So if we change our reading order from 1 to 2 columns and then just hit the reorder button right up here at the top, that will automatically reorder the page. And without having to do anything else, if you go back to the preview, you will see now you have your heading level 3s directly followed by the appropriate paragraph. And so the way that the 2-column reading order works is if you just visualize like Equidox splitting the page down the middle with like an invisible line, Everything left of that line will be found first. And then anything that remains that wasn't yet found is going to be in the right half, and it'll be found afterwards. So these zones here, despite the fact that they're like in the right column, they're also in the left column. They're like straddling the two columns. So these entire zones are still going to be found in that left column sequencing. And therefore, they're like unaffected by this two column choice. So it's not like we chop the zone in half and read half the text on the left and half the text on the right. The zone, the entire zone is technically in the left column. Therefore, they are unaffected by that reading order choice. So now we can see we have nice, good reading order for the page, and that looks pretty clean. If you were to give this to a screen reader, they would have that user would have, essentially the exact same experience that a sighted user would have by reading this document, because everything is in the order that you would expect. You have logical heading structure that they can navigate through. So if they only care about that paragraph, they can quickly find it and they can read that particular paragraph without having to read everything else. So with that said, those are like the two main things that I like to talk about on this page, heading structure and reading order. Is there anything else, or is there any questions thus far? I don't want to like jump too far ahead too quickly without pausing for questions.
Is there a way to manually adjust where we had down below the 6, 7, 8, 9? Is there a way if I just wanted to manually switch those paragraphs instead of doing the 2 column?
Sure. So that's something I like to demonstrate. So like, let's use this little page number down here, for example. So like this is reading zone 11 on the page. Let's pretend that we want this to be read second on the page. So up here, maybe we want it to be read like after the header, but before this heading level 1. Well, if I were to change 11 to 2, then I'd have to change 2 to 3 and 3 to 4 and 4 to 5 and, play musical chairs with all of these zones, because that would take a while and be really tedious. But I can just take the one zone that I feel is out of order, and over here in the order field where it says 11, I can use the decimal system. So I can just turn 11 into 1.1. And now when I go back to my preview, that page number will be like second in line in the reading order, because of course 1.1 is greater than 1 but less than 2. So it will like slot itself in to that position in the reading order without having that cascading effect of like everything else on the page needs to be shuffled around to make room for it. So that can be like a very helpful little tool that you have, and you're not necessarily going to use it for like this page number. You might actually choose to artifact this page number, but that can apply to really any zone, anytime on any page. So there's, most of the time you'll be able to get your reading order pretty close to what you're looking for with one of these 4 options, but you still might have some random like stray zones that are just floating in a position on the page that is not going to cooperate with one of these reading order choices. So you just grab that 1 or 2 or 3 zones on the page that aren't cooperating, and you just use the decimal system to kind of force them into position. And then Equidox will write the tag tree in the order which you see here in the HTML preview.
Perfect.
That's a good trick to have up your sleeve, just using the decimal system so you don't have to shuffle everything. No problem. And then the other thing I like to talk about on this page, I'm going to go back to the regular 2-column reading order, but the other thing that I talk about on this page is the concept of artifacting. So it's kind of a misconception, and I understand why people do it. People get trained to like how to tag content, and it's like they kind of get it beaten into their minds of like everything must be tagged, no exceptions. And that's true, I guess, when in doubt. Like if you're not sure, put a tag on something and make sure that it's read by the screen reader. But you can also have like a lot of redundant information in PDFs. Like take this header, for example. The document title is Equidox PDF training sample file, and then the heading level 1 is PDF sample document for Equidox training. Is a header that says sample document created for Equidox training, is that really necessary? Like it's just the same information 3 times in a row. So that can really just, be nothing more than like a speed bump for a screen reader user. So if you want to artifact something and take it out of the tagged reading order, you can click on a zone and you can hit the remove zone button, or you can just hit backspace on your keyboard. And when you hit backspace on your keyboard, you'll notice that zone is gone, The text itself is still going to be there. It's not like deleting anything from the PDF, but it will just make sure that that element is not included in the tagged reading order, that the screen reader will just get right to the point with the heading level 1. And then the other artifacting trick, and this is not a trick that I would bother with on a 2-page document, but you have these page numbers down here, and page numbers are just very common in PDFs, of course, but they're really more for print purposes. So like having a number 1 be like the last thing read on this page, it's really like nothing more than a point of confusion, because the last line of this paragraph is referencing section 1 period 10 period 32 period, and then that 1 is going to be read directly after that sequence of numbers. So, you know, if you just put yourself in the shoes of a blind person that can't visually see that this is like a totally separate object, it would be very easy for their ear to just conflate that sequence of numbers with that number 1. And so now they're just like on a wild goose chase looking for a section reference that doesn't even exist in this document, just because someone put a tag on top of that 1. But every PDF reader in existence, like digital PDF reader, can tell you that this is a 2-page PDF and that you are currently on page 1 of 2. So this is completely obsolete information. They're not waiting until the very last tag on a page to hear a number and go, oh, I must be on page 1. They already know that. And this, again, can only really be a point of confusion. Now, again, this is a trick, like, and I would just hit remove zone or hit backspace, but this is a trick that you can use for like larger documents where they might have like redundant headers and footers and things that are in like a fixed location on every page that you just want to eliminate from the tagged reading order kind of across the board. I can create like one little zone that's just kind of like hovering in that area of the page. It doesn't need to like be huge and like fully engulf everything. It just needs to intersect. And I can call this zone what's called an ignore zone. Now, an ignore zone is the same thing as artifacting something. So like if I go to my tag or my preview here, I'll see that the 1 is no longer included. But the cool thing about the ignore zone is that if I were to save the page and then just move over to page 2, without having to do anything to this page, the ignore zone copies itself. So I know that it's going to like intercept that page number on every page. And it doesn't always have to be page numbers. It could be a revision date, or it could be a repetitive logo, or some serial number for office use for like file keeping purposes or something. Whatever it is, if it's just like redundant information that a screen reader user shouldn't be hearing, you can create one ignore zone, and it's like an apply to all pages type of function. So that's just, you know, a handy trick to have up your sleeve. Again, I don't bother with a 2-page document doing that, but like 20 pages, 200 pages, it can be a big time saver, and also just kind of ensure that you're being consistent, where like you're not forgetting about it on half the pages, you know. So that's just another trick that you have up your sleeve. Okay, so on this page here, just, you know, a little bit of review, so we'll go a little quicker, but I'm just going to hit backspace to get rid of that little header thing. This is a heading level 2. So we remember like that font style from the first page. So I'm going to go back in my heading structure back to a heading level 2. And then down here, I realize there's been a little bit of a design flaw, and this type of stuff can happen, where you don't always want to go back and like, you know, tap the author on the shoulder and say, hey, fix this document in your Word file and send it back to me so I can remediate it properly. Sometimes you just deal with what you get. So we forgot to put a carriage return after this heading level 2. So the zone is just kind of, you know, consolidating the paragraph and the heading together. Right. Now, I don't want to just call this a heading level 2 and say good enough. I want to fix this. And I could probably fix this with the slider up here and just change the setting and get a better detection. But I can also just grab the bottom of the zone and just drag it up. So it's not like that big of a deal. If you have to make like a couple of small like manual little tweaks to the zones, you can just manipulate the size and the position of the zones and just kind of drag them around. So now I've got my heading level 2 and I've got my paragraph. So let's check the preview. And when we check the preview, something will jump out like pretty obvious as an issue. And that's the fact that this paragraph has leapfrogged to the top of the reading. So this is why the HTML preview is a really important feature, because if you're going really fast and you're just kind of in the rhythm of the document, you're being like a hotshot remediator, you might forget that you artifacted this number 1 reading zone up here. So I hit backspace on that. That was reading zone 1. When I draw this zone manually, it takes over that open slot in the reading order and it becomes reading zone 1. So just hit the order button and everything will go back to normal. So that's why it's, just important to like use the preview, if for nothing else, just to double check your reading order. I always remind people, like, there's so many things to consider in PDF accessibility. Like, every PDF is unique. Every PDF has different nuances, and it's like a little puzzle to solve. But if you are a novice remediator and you can do nothing else, make sure the one thing that you do is make sure that the reading order is correct. So reading order, in my opinion, is the most important part of PDF accessibility. It has a huge influence on how the content is understood. So if things are reading out of order, it can render the entire document to not only be just confusing, but could also just be misinforming someone, because the order in which they hear that content presented to them has just a huge impact on what it means to them. So even if you have no idea how to do PDF tagging, at the very least, make sure that the reading order is correct. And there's really no excuse for that when you have the HTML preview. Everyone can kind of interpret how they would visually read a PDF, and just make sure that that content is being presented in the same order over here. The other thing on this page, there's a couple of images, and these are just kind of silly images, of course. They're not really important, but we will use them just to demonstrate kind of like image functionality. So first and foremost, when you have images in a PDF, you have 2 choices. You can either give them a description or you can mark them as an artifact. Now, I see a common mistake. Like, there's 2 ends of the spectrum. People will either like be super lazy and just kind of avoid image descriptions altogether, or they'll be super verbose with their descriptions, where they'll take like a logo and they want to write in like a 2-paragraph essay over here describing that logo. So you have to kind of like interpret the image within the context of the PDF and help that as like the foundation of your alternative text that you're going to write in. So, don't leave this blank. Don't write in a 10-paragraph essay to describe a logo. So we'll talk a little bit more about image descriptions on like a document that contains more interesting images. But just from a functionality standpoint, you have those 2 options. Now, on the left-hand side here, I just want to point out that there's 2 tabs. You have the Zones tab and you have the Page tab. I don't spend a ton of time on the Page tab. Some of the functionality over here is redundant. I have like the same slider that I have up here. I have one right here. And that also has like an apply to all pages function. And the same thing with reading order. I have the ability to change the reading order from here, and I can apply it to all pages. I don't like the concept of applying reading order to all pages. Like, that's very heavy-handed, and it should always be kind of considered at the page level, because certain pages are just not going to cooperate. So I don't like the idea that you can just choose a 3-column reading order for a 50-page document and say that's going to be good enough. I don't really subscribe to that idea. There are some random examples of when that can work well, but again, just be careful with the apply to all pages, because that can give like a false sense of security that, like, I did one page right, so now every page is going to be right because I hit this button. That's not exactly true. But one of the settings over here, it's this images checkbox. Now, by default, it's going to be selected or turned on for you. But if you deselect it, the image zones will disappear. So those will now be artifacted images. And if you go to your preview, you'll see that they're no longer included. So if you have like a bunch of images on a page, you get like some crazy like mosaic of images, or you have just a bunch of like background decorations and rectangles and triangles and things that are just there for like visual aesthetics, you might find it useful to just be able to turn all of the images off for the entire page. However, you might have pages where it's like a mixed bag. You want to artifact some of the images, but keep some of the images around. So you can also just click on an image that you want to artifact, and just hit backspace on your keyboard. And then that image zone will disappear, but you're left with this one. And as you can probably predict, when you go to your preview, you'll see that you have the Equidox logo. The lorem ipsum generic graphic thing is artifacted. Now, again, if you're going to keep this logo around, we need to make sure that we're typing in a description. So I'm just going to type in something like Equidox logo. That's all I need to say about a logo. I don't need to go into detail about the font color and the capital letters and all of that nonsense. Just tell them that it's a logo so that they know that it's a logo and not a pie chart or something like that. So that's the important thing there is, writing like an appropriate alt text. Things like logos, they don't need a big giant, run-on sentence to describe them. The other thing is that I'm often asked about is like long description and title. Just so you're aware, these are for HTML exports only. There is no property for images in the PDF world for a long description or a title related to an image. So you really just have to worry about the description field. These are only there if you plan on converting your document into an HTML or an EPUB format. So for the most part, just ignore these unless you have like distinct plans to convert it into an HTML file. And even then, there are still optional fields. You don't have to put in a long description. This is really your primary concern is the description field. Now, a couple of other things here, like regarding the interface, when I'm done working on a page, I like to hit this check mark right here to mark it validated. Now, what this does, when you mark a page validated, it kind of like saves the page for you and it turns green. But like when you're back at the document detail page, you can see that this page is finished. Now, it doesn't do anything to like the tags or anything. It doesn't change the way that the document is going to be exported, but it's an internal communication tool within Equidox. This is a 2-page document, and at full speed, this would take me about 10 seconds to remediate, and I would just move on with my day after I'm done exporting it. But if you have really complicated documents or a 200-page document, chances are you're not going to just sit at your computer and do 200 pages in a row. You're probably going to be like picking that document apart, 10 minutes at a time over the course of a couple of weeks as you have little free moments to get some stuff done. So if you're like kind of have like a stop, start approach to a document, you don't want to have to like memorize which pages did I work on, which pages did I skip, where do I pick up where I left off. Like that creates just a lot of like anxiety that like you forgot to do a couple pages or something slips through the cracks. So if you're marking pages validated, for sure that this page has been worked on, so you don't have to worry about going back and visiting it again later. You can, of course, like retroactively mark a page validated. So we know that we worked on page 1. So I can always go back into it and just, again, hit the check mark to let myself know that I'm finished with it. So not as important on a 2-page document, but when you're working on longer documents and you're collaborating and working with other people, there's no ambiguity as to like, has someone done something to this page or not? You know that it's been worked on, so you can just keep it moving and go find another page to interact with. The other thing about the interface up here, like just to go through like what these buttons do, this little menu on the side, again, is collapsible. So if you don't want to look at other page thumbnails, you can get it out of the way. You have a zoom in and a zoom out button. These are pretty self-explanatory, like universal, like magnifying glass symbols. We've talked a lot about the preview. This preview button that we haven't talked about, it's really only for fillable forms, just so you're aware. If you have a document that contains fields, fillable form fields, that's when you would kind of interact with this preview. This is not a document that contains fields, so it's not really worth looking at, but that's really just only meant for form documents. We've talked about the validate check mark, so we'll leave that alone for now. This is a save button. Now, with Equidox, it's really hard to like lose progress in your document, right? Like as you are working on pages, you can hit this save button at any time just to kind of manually save. If you mark a page validated, it will save it for you. But also, as you're going from like page to page, you will be reminded to save your work on that page. So if you are like finished with the page and you try to arrow over, it will give you a prompt, like a pop-up menu will prompt you to save your work. And this is for a couple of reasons, but mainly we're working in a browser. So browsers can freeze and crash, and you never know what kind of catastrophes can happen. So we don't ever want you to lose hours of work because your browser forces you to update in the middle of your day or something. So as you're working, you're always kind of saving your work, even when you're arrowing over from page to page. And then the little lowercase I button back over here to the right, this is the menu of keyboard shortcuts. So I used a couple of keyboard shortcuts like the delete key and the numbers for the heading structure. This is the menu of shortcuts. Now you don't have to memorize these from top to bottom. Some of them you're not going to use all that frequently. But this is something that the more you incorporate these shortcuts, the faster of a remediator you will be. So it's just less mouse movement. It's less scrolling. It's less, drop down menus to deal with. So just the more of this that you learn, the better you'll become. So if you need to refer to it, you always can. That's where the menu is located. And then the only other button up here that I haven't touched on is this one here. It's like a little circle button. Just so you're aware, the little green flags in the upper left and right-hand corner, some people find them to be an eyesore. I usually leave them kind of turned on, but you can toggle them on and off to whatever setting you prefer. And sometimes I temporarily disable them because you're working on a really crowded page and they do get in the way and they aren't that nice to look at when you have 100 zones on the page. But you can make that choice with this little circle button up here if you want them on or off. So it's up to you. And that just shows again the type of zone and then the reading order on the page. Okay, and I'm going to X out to go back to the document detail page. And now that we're finished with this PDF and we're happy with the work that we've done, we're going to go to the export tab. So when I click on the export tab, it's going to give me some different options. The default option is PDF, meaning that that's going to be your primary format that most people export to. You can also convert things into HTML or EPUB as well. So if you want to convert it out of the PDF format, you're more than welcome to. And then zones is a tab that you probably don't have enabled. It's meant for zone transfer. That's an add-on feature. We can talk about that at a later time if you're interested in it. But the PDF format is, kind of where you'll spend the majority of your time, I would assume. And if you just hit the generate PDF button, it will produce a brand new document for you. It's going to default back to the original file name unless you choose to type in a different file name. So usually I just hit the generate button. I don't even bother messing around with the file name because it's going to just go back to the original. Now this is the new PDF. It's the same one that we started with, except this one is going to be improved because it's going to actually be tagged. So we already looked at the original one in Acrobat where it was completely untagged. And of course, if you were to run the accessibility checker, it's going to light up like a Christmas tree with issues, as you would expect. But we will open up the new one, the one on my desktop. And this one is fully tagged. Oops. So we have the document tag, we have the heading level 1, we have the heading level 2, we have a paragraph, H3 paragraph, H3 paragraph, H3 paragraph, another H2 paragraph, another H2 and a paragraph, and then there's our figure tag. Take note that this image and the headers and footers are artifacted as we kind of instructed Equidox to do. And if we run the accessibility check, we will find that all of those things that were failing before are now passing, which is good. The only two things that remain are these two. If you use Acrobat, then you're very familiar with this. These are unavoidable. They are just omnipresent. They are not failures. They're just reminders. We know that the reading order is correct. We've already checked it twice over at this point. And also color contrast. There's really not much you can do to a PDF regarding color contrast unless you want to start editing the document. And if that's a route you want to go, then I wish you good luck. It's a very dangerous game to play. You'll break more documents than you'll fix. Don't recommend at some point you just have to draw a line in the sand and say, we're going to fix our templates to make sure that we don't have contrast issues. If you're talking about a 10-year-old document where you have no idea where the source file is, it's a very hard thing to address color contrast once it's a PDF, because PDFs were not made to be edited. They are very much hate being edited. So it's you're walking a dangerous line if you're going to go down that path. So this document is done. That's kind of the full workflow. I know a very long-winded way to get there, but Any questions on any part of that workflow, like going through like that whole step-by-step process?
No, that was very helpful. I think my only additional question would be how I would handle tagging a table or something of that nature.
Sure. So I'll put a different document in that has a couple of different elements in it. Let's see, something like this will work. So this document has it has headings and text, but it also has a list, it has a table, and it has like a pie chart kind of graphic thing. So we'll talk about how to handle those three different elements. So this, if we open it up, first thing I'll do is just bump my slider over a little bit, give us a nicer place to start from. Simple heading structure. I'm just going to go H1, and then I'll set these as like H2s just to kind of keep it straightforward. And looking at the preview right out of the gate, we'll see, okay, I got headings, I got a paragraph, but that's basically the only thing here that's right. I have a lot of other cleanup work that I need to do. This looks like a bunch of, chaos on the HTML preview. So the first thing we'll look at is the list. This list is not a list at all as it currently stands. It's really just kind of like a weird run-on sentence. And sure, it's better to have this than have nothing at all. Like an untagged document would be bad, but like at least this content will be read. However, it's not going to be read like in an optimal way. A screen reader user could very easily get confused with like 5% and 71, 6% and 8. Like, how do these numbers all correlate together? It's just not how this was intended to be read. So right now, as it stands, it's really just kind of like a text zone, and it's going to just be read as just a run-on sentence. So what we'll do is we'll fix it. We'll call it a list by hitting L on our keyboard, L for list, and it will drop you down to the list detector. And when you get down to the list detector, you just have to bump that slider from left to right, and all of those list items will be found for you. So when you go back to your preview, instead of having that sentence-looking thing, you now have a list with 5 distinct list items. Now, this is a very simple list, of course. There's only 5 bulleted items, but that's really like what list detection looks like in Equidox. I mean, like, don't overcomplicate it. You just change the zone from a text zone to a list, and it will then bring you down to the list detector, and you bump the slider from left to right. The other settings on the slider, like settings 2, 3, 4, and 5, they will incorporate artificial intelligence, but they're really meant more for like complex lists. When you have like ordered lists using Roman numerals and numbers and letters, you get into like nested lists where you have lists inside of lists and that sort of thing. When you have just like simple bulleted lists or like dashes or just kind of non-sequential list labels, you really just have to call it a list and bump the slider from, left to right, and that it'll do all of that heavy lifting for you. So keep it simple here with just like a simple list, but that's, really all there is to it. It's a very, very simple element to deal with in Equidox. And then here we have a table. So as you can probably tell, this table is not really a table. It's just a bunch of clusters of text. And of course, you can see the proof of that over here, where there is not in the world that can tell you what that 153 means. It's impossible to decipher all of that information. So I'm just going to consolidate this zone. I'm just going to put everything inside of one zone, and we can ignore like all of the clutter that's there. We don't have to like delete all of these zones one by one. Just leave them behind for now. They're fine. I'm going to then hit T on my keyboard, T for table, or again, you can use the drop-down menu if you prefer. And once you change it to a table, it's going to drop you over here, or it gives you a button for the table editor that you can press. Or if you want to, you can just like double click on the table itself, and it will bring you into the table editor. So you can press the table editor button, or you can double click on the table. Either way will work. Now that we're in the table editor, there are these like green grid lines, which if you feel like it, you can click on them and you can drag them around and you can make adjustments to them. You can add additional rows, like with these buttons up here. You can delete rows. There's keyboard shortcuts. So like adding a row is R, deleting a row is D, that sort of thing. You can add columns. You can delete columns. So you can make these types of adjustments if you really want to, but it's not all that necessary because we have the table detector. So the table detector here is just a series of sliders, so similar to like the list detector. If I just nudge the sliders from left to right, like going back and forth, you'll see the artificial intelligence just kind of wakes up and it puts those grid lines in the exact spot where they belong. So now all of those cells are like neatly defined for me. And if you go to your preview, you will find that you now have something that is no longer just a big like cluster of random bits of text. We now actually have a real table with tabular structure. So the bold font, this is the like kind of the important part of tables. The bold font in the top row and the far left column, that is an indication of table headers, whereas the standard font in the middle of the table is table data. Equidox by default assumes that your column and row header structure are at that 1-to-1 ratio by default. Now it's up to the remediator to kind of like interpret the table for kind of what the column and row header situation is. So in this case here, it's perfectly fine to just leave it as is. You want a single column header because it's just these years up here defining the entire column. And then you want a row header, you know, because like faculty is defining that row. But if you have like, let's say you have like 2021, and then it's subdivided by like quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. What you'll end up wanting to do is like set 2 column headers, and then if you go to your preview, you will find, if I get that to refresh, you have the bold font for your top 2 rows. Now that's not correct for this table, of course. You would stick with a standard 1-to-1 ratio, but you can adjust this accordingly. So if you have 0 row headers, change your row header from 1 to 0. And then you go back here and you'll see that, oh, you don't have that bold font anymore. Those will all be tagged as table data. So you just have to kind of play with that ratio. Most tables are going to be just that standard 1-to-1 ratio, but there can always be exceptions. The other thing that's kind of messed up with this table right now, and this just comes down to the way that it was designed, faculty is really supposed to be a row header for both of these rows. But the way that it was physically designed is like faculty is only sitting inside of that cell, and this is a blank cell right here. So I don't want to have a table where I have empty row headers, because technically all of this data does not have a row header that it's being assigned to. Visually, you know, someone that's, you know, sighted is going to see that faculty automatically is just going to correlate with both of these rows, just because they can tell when they look at the table like itself. They can make that visual connection. But from a technical standpoint, machines just don't see things the way that our human eyes see them. So we need to tell the machine that these 2 cells really ought to be 1 cell. So if I click inside of the faculty cell, I can hold Shift on my keyboard, and I can click in the cell where I want to span to. So we call it spanning inside of Equidox. Some people might call it merging. But inside of, now that I've got both of these cells selected, I can either hit the span button or I can just hit S on my keyboard. And then that will consolidate the 2 cells so that faculty will act as a row header for both of those rows. And I'll do the same thing here. So I'm just going to hold Shift and press S, hold Shift, press S, hold Shift, press S. Oops, I deleted a row. Don't want to do that. Hold Shift and press S. Hit the S key, not the D key. So now I have all of the row headers defined, straddling those 2 rows. And that can be done with column headers, row headers, table data. You can span any cells that you would like. Basically, you're just trying to kind of avoid like having a bunch of empty stuff inside of your table. Sometimes tables have empty cells and there's nothing you can do about it. It's not a great design, but it is just a reality of tables that sometimes certain cells are left empty. You really, though, avoid having empty header cells. You don't want empty column headers. You don't want empty row headers. Table data, you know, ideally there's no empty cells, but sometimes it's unavoidable. You just want to make sure that you're not having like an entire row of data that has no row header over here. So that spanning goes a long way to cleaning that type of stuff up. And now that you're done doing those spans, if you just save the table and close out of it, when we're back to the remediation page, we have the table now that has eliminated all of those extra columns that we had, like all those like different zones that were there before. They're gone, and now we're just left with one single table on the page, which is what we're looking for. The other thing is down below here, we have like something goofy going on with this graph, like this bar chart. I don't know who created this or why or how, but for some reason, like there's 4 different layers of this image all stacked on top of each other. And that's not really ideal. You don't want 4 figure tags like piled on top of each other. It just can create kind of weirdness in the tag tree. But also it's like a waste of time for me. Like I don't want to type in 4 separate alt text for 4 portions of this image. So again, I don't know how this document came to be, but it is what it is. First thing I'll do is I'm going to just go to the page tab and I'm going to deselect that images checkbox. Get it out of the way for now, and like let's see what we're actually working with. And once you get rid of those images, you're just left with like the labels on the X and Y axis. So like very satisfied, somewhat satisfied, neutral. Like I don't know what any of this means without like the context of seeing how far across the X-axis these little gray bars are traveling. These labels over here really have no significance whatsoever. So another trick here, like I could certainly just click on these zones and hit backspace one at a time and get rid of them. But another little trick just to speed this up, and this isn't a trick that you're going to use on every document, but just so you're aware that it exists, I can put one zone on top of this whole area of the page. I can change this zone to what's called a sensitivity zone. Now, a sensitivity zone is not like a tag type, but it's an Equidox zone that we can use. And once I change it to a sensitivity zone, I get a little slider here that is the same concept as like the sensitivity slider up top, but it's only going to impact the area of the page where I've drawn the sensitivity zone. I'm not making a mess of all this other work that I've done. I'm just going to drag this down to 0 to get rid of all of those little tiny zones at once. So now that I've gotten rid of all of that clutter, I can change this sensitivity zone to a graphic. And when you change it to a graphic, this is going to, when you export it, a graphic zone will become a figure tag, just the same as an image. Except with a graphic, I'm like manually defining where I want that figure tag to be placed. So I'm creating like the boundaries of my image. So instead of having 4 random layers to this graph and having a bunch of random labels as text zones, I've now just consolidated the whole thing into one clean graphic. And now I can type in an alternative description for it. And if I look at the preview, what I'll see is like, again, I don't have like to deal with all that extra clutter. I just have one nice little graphic right here. Now the description, we talked earlier about like writing alt text for images, and we only use the example of like the logo. Now, again, going back to that idea of like, there's 2 extreme ends of the spectrum that I see people kind of like ending up on. Some people will be super lazy and they learn how to like trick the accessibility checkers, and they'll just say like something like bar charts. That is very much just a generic description. Yes, it's true that this is a bar chart, but it is not actually conveying any of the information presented in the bar chart. So this is just not enough detail, and you're leaving the blind user at a huge disadvantage because they have no idea what this bar chart is actually conveying. But at the same time, you don't want to write in like a 5,000 word essay here trying to be like overly descriptive, because it's just like information overload. Like there's only so much that can be done within reason when it comes to like describing charts. If you give someone a massive essay, it's going to be very hard for them to like pay attention long enough and collect all of that information in paragraph form. Data visualization is not great for a blind user. It's just the reality of it. In a perfect world, this would be just a table, and the blind user could just kind of navigate through the table data, and they could hear all of these exact, numerical values represented in a table. Well, that's just not what the author has given us. So we have to do our best to like kind of describe what's going on here. Now, when I look at the bar chart, I think like, all right, well, there's 5 different labels on the y-axis. There's 4 different years. So 4 years times 5 different criteria, that's 20 different data points. That's not too bad. Like depending on how fast you type, it might take you a couple minutes to type all of that out. But then I look closer at the bar chart and I realize, like, all right, like this black bar for very satisfied, is that 51%? Is it 52%? Is it 51.736%? Like, I really have no idea. And I'm not going to get a ruler out and start measuring pixels. Like, if the author really wanted me to know what that exact numerical value was, they would have put it into a table, or they would have labeled these bars with percentage points. The fact that I can't even tell visually what these exact data points are, I don't want to sit here and guesstimate and then put that into like raw data for the blind user over here, because I myself can't even tell as a sighted user. So what I kind of gather by looking at this chart is, instead of me writing out every little data point where I'm probably going to get half of them wrong because I'm mismeasuring with my eyes how far across these little x-axis the bars go, I'm just going to summarize this. And I'm going to say, from the years 2019 to 2022, the vast majority of people were either very satisfied or somewhat satisfied with the IT environment on campus. So when I type it out that way, I'm spending, 10 seconds typing in a very reasonable alt text that they're going to be able to easily understand and interpret. And they're, in general, walking away with the exact same information that I have as a sighted user. If the author really cared about me knowing exactly what percent of people were dissatisfied in 2021, they wouldn't have put a little tiny gray square right there. They would have put a percentage value. The whole point of this is to show that, in general, IT is doing a pretty bang up job, because almost everyone is satisfied. Sure, some people are neutral, a few people are dissatisfied, but in general, they're doing a pretty good job. And that's kind of what they're conveying with this chart. And that is what I'm going to summarize over here. I'm not spending a half hour writing out an essay. I'm not guessing at what these numbers should represent. And I'm also not being lazy and just typing in bar chart. So you have to kind of find, like, a happy medium when it comes to alt text writing, to give that end user a good experience. So with that said, I don't know if there's any questions about kind of like how we got to this point, or anything that I can clarify or show you again on this page that's any different.
Nope, that was very clear. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
One question is, like, if you're going through this and then all of a sudden you discover you have a typo either on a page or multiple pages, like, can you replace your existing PDF and still keep what you've done, or
so that would be the zone transfer feature. So, like, what you can do is, let's pretend that the word introduction was misspelled. You can click on the zone source. If you click on actual text, you can come in here and you can edit whatever like typo thing that you might have. And if you go back to your preview, it's not going to visually fix the typo in the PDF itself, but you can make it read differently by the screen reader so that it's not going to, like, mispronounce the word introduction. So you can edit how it is read. You're not editing how it visually appears. If the author made a typo and they didn't proofread it, that's kind of like their own fault, but you can still make sure that the screen reader user has a good experience. Now, if you want to, if you do want to go back to the source file and make a correction to something, where that kind of falls in line with is the concept of zone transfer. So zone transfer, just so we're clear, it's like an add-on feature. And if I can show you how it works real quick. Let's say that I take the original document and I import it. And again, we're pretending that we're just fixing a typo, or maybe the data in that table changes or whatever. There's a minor modification. I am able to take the one that I've already worked on, and when I go to the export tab, one of the options will say zones if you have this add-on feature enabled. And if I hit download zones, it will give me like a little zip folder. And this zip folder is not particularly exciting for us. It's just got all of that information that relates to the zones. And then I can go into the new one, the one that I've just imported. And remember, like this one is going to be a mess. You know, there's nothing good going on here at all. But I'm able to click on zone transfer. I can click on upload document zones. And then I just need to grab that little zip folder that I just created and hit upload zones. And when I do that and I go back into the document now, I have all of that work that I did to the first version now applies over here to version 2.
Okay.
But this is a feature where we've kept it separate. It's like disconnected from like the concurrent model, because you might have a bunch of people that are using Equidox and have access to Equidox that don't really know how zone transfer works and don't know when it's appropriate to use it. So, you know, with great power comes great responsibility. Like we kind of reserve it for people that have specific use cases in mind that it makes sense to use it and like would need to use it frequently. But if you just have random people getting the idea that like, oh, these zones were good, they passed the accessibility checker, and then they start applying it to like completely random documents, thinking that it's like a one size fits all type of approach, that can lead you down like, you know, a path where you have just, you know, all kinds of bad documents now because someone was just pressing buttons because they weren't properly trained and they didn't know when it was appropriate to use it. So we kind of reserve it for the people that understand how to use it, when to use it, and why to use it. It's not something that should just be kind of like haphazardly applied all over the place. So it's kind of set up for specific named users that you kind of decide are like, okay, it would be good for this person to have the zone transfer because they have this use case where they can frequently use it. And you can always do a zone transfer for someone else. So if someone doesn't have a zone transfer enabled, then you can like you could just like have them send you the document and you would just do the zone transfer for them. And then you can just share the PDF back with them, you know, so that they have access to it. So if there's like a one-off example where someone really needs to use zone transfer, but they didn't have that add-on feature enabled for them, like someone else can still kind of, you know, take responsibility for it. And just, it takes 10 seconds to do it, as you can see. So you can talk to Kevin if you need, like, if you run into a situation where you like really need a zone transfer, you can submit a support ticket. And the support team is like happy to do that for you, is like, you know, kind of like a one-off, you know, you catch a typo at the last minute or there's a last minute edit to something that you were already working on. If it's like a very infrequent thing and you just need like, you know, a little helping hand, you can always submit a ticket and they can help you with that.